Okay, before I go too much further, let's back up just a second and discuss what it is that we're looking at, right? We said that we're looking at bars and we're looking at candlesticks. Now, if we go into the data series or we right click on the chart, we go to data series. When we say bars, we're looking at a data series. The data series can be any one of these choices. We can be looking at a weekly, a daily, a minute, a range, a tick, volume, whatever. We just happen to be looking at a 15-minute. No matter what series you choose here, you're going to end up having to select some type of chart style or some type of representation of that price over that time series or that whatever type of series you picked, how that's represented. And then we have these choices down here. Now, everybody probably already understands what a candlestick is. We have an open, a high, a low, and a close. We don't necessarily have to have all four of those values in a given candlestick, or we could be looking at it in the case of line breaks and the Cagney line and some of these point and figures. You could be looking at a totally different thing altogether. Most everything that I can think of is going to end up having a close, though. I mean, the bar has to close somewhere for the next bar to resume. But now let's go back and look at that, because if we go back to the very first bar, we're going to go right click on our chart and we're going to come down here to show data box. Now I'm just going to auto size this and turn everything available on. Now if I turn this on and I turn my cursors on, make that easier to see, as I hover over this bar, you're going to see that I have a bars ago and I have a bar index. Let's look at the bar index compared to the bars ago. So if we scroll to the very first chart, hopefully I can set that over there, and that is bar index 0. The very first bar of our chart is 0. That's important to remember. But now this is going to be a little confusing, because when I come to the very end of the chart and we hover over the last bar, we can see that the bar index now is 6433, meaning I have a total number of 6,433 bars on this chart currently till this bar ends and another one starts. But look at what bars ago is. Now bars ago is 0. So when we're dealing with the open and the high and the low and the close and the values of these bars, we're going to have to take into consideration what type of series we're using to know whether it is we need to use the bars ago or the bars index. Because we're going to access the close of this bar just by using close in our code. But if we're doing this in on-bar update and we want to look at the close of the very last bar or the current bar, we're going to say we want the close of 0. If we want the close of the bar before, we would say close of 1 or close of 2 or close of 3 or whatever number of bar this is. This big bar right there is 95 bars ago. So if we say close of, put 95 in brackets, we're going to get the value of the close of that bar. Now, I don't want to confuse too much, but there's going to be times where we have to use the absolute value of that bar. We're using close 0, 1 as bars back in on bar update. And then we'll get to some other code like in on render and some of the other things that you'll actually have to. Anytime you're outside of on bar update, pretty much should be calling for an absolute index. Let's not deal with that yet. This little bit might clear up some confusion that we're about to talk about.